in our panel.
So thanks everybody in particular for being here on a Saturday morning in Austin, Texas. I imagine some of you went out last night. So the fact that you showed and are actually here really means a lot to us. My name is James Lanyon, as Stephen said. I head up strategy and innovation here at T3 in Austin. As he mentioned, one of our most recent projects was the redeployment of the Staples Easy button as an IoT product, as a competitor to Alexa in the B2B space. And that actually was really edifying because we were actually very involved even in the rudimentary aspects of NLP, natural language processing and stuff. It's a very complex field. It's one I find fascinating. I was hoping everybody on our panel could briefly introduce themselves, talk about who you work for and your background. The topic specifically we're going to address today is whether or not, as marketers, we need to address an artificial intelligence / machine learning strategy. And we're going to come at it from a couple of different angles and then save time for a few questions at the end. So, Janessa, if you want to take it away.
All right, so my name is Janessa Carter. I work at Isobar in Boston. Isobar is a marketing and technology, basically consultant company. So a lot of my work is helping companies figure out if we should implement certain technologies, but primarily from the customer point of view. So what is your vision for your company and your customer experience, and how do we actually create that in some sort of roadmap? And just like the last panel, a lot of that is planning out what pilots and what things can we do right now in the near term versus what do we need to be implementing in the longer term.
Good morning. I am Whitney Fishman Zember. I run innovation consumer technology for Wavemaker US. Wavemaker is part of Group M and WBP. We are a media marketing agency for companies like IKEA, Danone, Tiffany, L'Oreal, all sorts of fun stuff. But my job in particular is to work with our clients to better understand the role of technology, both emerging, consumer-facing, back-end, and what are those opportunities to create better, more connective experiences for customers.
So my name's Eric Perz. I'm the VP of Data Science for Marc USA. We're a mid-sized agency, I'd say, based out of Pittsburgh and a few other offices. So our job is sort of twofold. I'd say 60% of what we do is media performance measurement. So anything from BI reporting all the way to marketing mix optimizations. And attribution, you could say, is maybe in between, things like that. And on the other side is more data mining, taking customer databases, other data feeds, and looking for patterns in data. So we're, I'd say my team is pretty technical. We're in the data. We're coding ourselves. Even I'm doing some of that. And we're, really using R, Python, things like that to develop these models and deploy them for our clients.
Sheehy helped open the RGA Austin office 6 years ago and lead our strategy department for RGA Austin, which includes a team of brand strategists, social strategists, media and connections, but then also experience strategists as you think about the two ways that we really think about AI. And part of that is on the media side, how you're putting the right message and creative in front of people, but then also on the products and services side, which is really the two coins of RGA's ethos is products and services that change your business and communications that make you more aware of them. So kind of sit in the intersection of both of those areas.
What a great panel, right? And like all of these divergent points of view and all of these great backgrounds and sets of experience. So I guess I would put it to each of you, and we can actually start with Kate. Your opinion, what do you think? Do you think marketers today should be actively pursuing an artificial intelligence and machine learning strategy?
Yeah, I think it's definitely, there's no way for humans to manage data of this size and scale, whether it's on the communication side or on the product and services side, in which case the only way we can do that is through technology. And that is definitely a common theme across every client we have is, what do I do with all this data? How do I make sense of it? How do I make it actionable, whether it is communications or some new service we want to create?
Yeah, I have a similar take on that and also a little different. So I just want to do a quick education, if I might. So machine learning is actually a big spectrum of things. So it goes on one end to even classical statistics stuff, and simple stuff like regressions, to Bayesian statistics, which is a little more complicated, but still pretty well known, all the way to the other end, which is what we're calling like artificial neural networks, which is what the building blocks of what we're calling AI are for the most part. So yeah, I would say across the spectrum, marketing needs to get involved in that, but I would put the emphasis a little bit on the middle side of the spectrum, which is understanding what works. And so for instance, marketing mix, time series analytics, these sort of things have actually been really accelerated in what they're capable of doing. So we're delivering answers for very hyper-specific questions like what is what is this ad group doing for this device at this time of day? And you can develop models that can help optimize along those lines. So I think in terms of getting the talent in-house to be able to answer those kinds of questions across the board, that is a pretty big priority, I think, for marketers.
Agree with all of the above. How many people in the audience actually come from agencies or have an agency background? So you guys know everybody's holding on by like a thread, right? It's like a hot mess express. Like whatever you tell your clients, I'm sure is magical and wonderful, but if you look behind the hood of what you have going on, what data do we use? How do we call that data? Are we using that data? Are we looking at the right data? Are we making the right buys? You know, the conversation around trust, efficiency, spend. You're getting a lot of pushback from your clients. You're getting a lot of pushback from your partners. So I wouldn't really say the question is, do you have a strategy? It's how do you push past buzzword bingo and what are you doing to create smarter efficiencies on your back end that are driving the results and driving the right use of dollars and driving that trust and connecting the dots. A lot of you already have, you just may not be using it in the most efficient sort of way.
And to make it for people, I also agree, you definitely need a strategy. One of the things that we often see is we're not quite prepared to jump into that full vision that our clients really want us to do, or that even we really want our clients to do. So a big part of that is understanding what you have. We were kind of talking about that in preparation, and what can you use right now that will get you to your longer term vision. And then another part that we talked a bit about, which I thought was really interesting, is helping to train your younger talent, or maybe even getting involved in schools and things like that. So not just thinking about internally what do you have, but thinking about how do you bring in the talent and start to recruit for that future vision planning that you want. And then the third point I'll make is that even if you're not ready as an organization to implement any sort of AI or machine learning, your customers want you to, and they're experiencing it everywhere else, and you're being influenced by it no matter what. And so you at least need to understand the world so that you can embrace it or be prepared for the change that it's making in your business, even if you're not doing anything.
So you touch on a really good point. In as agencies, our job is to not only make the right recommendation and lead our clients in the right direction, but also to help them understand where to start, right? Because when we think about it, Kate, you talked about earlier, this whole notion of there's so much going on, and we think about the term artificial intelligence, and you separate that from the modern sort of pop culture discussion, and you actually start getting into the technology and the business of it. How are you counseling each one of you, your clients, or even your peers who aren't necessarily savvy on it, on how to think about where to get started, where the early opportunities are, how to structure an approach, or even how to potentially start formulating an internal game plan for adding it to their business transformation pipeline?
I can kick it off. So I will say, oh, time's up. So I'll say two things. One, I think I'm a big believer in helping people make better decisions. I feel like most of the decisions we make come from a place of fear, like the bad ones, not the good ones, the bad ones. But how many of you guys feel confident that you could tell your clients what AI is in 1 or 2 sentences and believe what you're selling, and speak to a grandmother, a toddler, your clients who run somewhere on that spectrum? Yeah, exactly. So I think when we talk technology first, we talked about this a bit earlier with the keynote, it's a huge issue because not only do you play buzzword bingo and you're not speaking like a human, you get so wrapped up in applying the technology and checking the box of we've got an AI strategy, that you sort of miss to do what? Why, right? So forget technology. I think it's stepping back first and saying, what are the problems that we have? Is it disparate data? Is it we feel like we're not making the most of our dollars? Is it a targeting issue? Is it just operational efficiency? And when you start with the core problem, just like when you're planning, you start with the human insight, you start with the problem, you start to figure out, okay, why do we have that problem? And then from there, what are the opportunities that we have to connect the dots? And if we could connect, for example, back-end data, would that allow us to target better? If we found a way to sort of streamline the inputs and the data that we were getting from app usage, could we serve better opportunities and experiences? And from there, you really can decide what technology do you then bring in to help close the gaps that a human just can't handle at scale.
So kind of touching on that, right? I went through a similar exercise earlier this year with a major retailer, and they were trying to educate their executive leadership committee on the opportunity to address certain problems. And we ran, of course, into the rationalized business case, right, the old RPC. So have you had that discussion with your clients as to how to rationalize a business case against some of those problems and how to actually convince people that this ethereal idea could actually be a returning investment in the short term?
100%. I mean, I think if you tell someone that we can help you solve a problem, and we can do it in weeks, months, years, or we can take something that you never actually realized was a solvable problem, therefore you never actually qualified it as a problem, I think people are all ears. I think if you come in and say, we're going to bring in AI and we have partners, they're going to be like, cool story. Like, to do what? Like, what does that mean? Like, what? That sounds expensive.
Kate, I see you nodding a lot down there.
Yeah, I mean, when we think about the thing you teed up at first was, it's a transformative technology, and anytime there's transformation, it means you have to do some sort of innovation. And to innovate better and more often, we find that you have to go a little bit smaller. Pilots and prototypes being, I think, a very key point of how you get things done. We worked with a major cruise line, and what we found from a media standpoint is that, well, number one, it's a very complicated booking process. There's double the steps as it would be to book any other vacation, because it's not only where you're going, but what ship, what destination port, what ports of call are you going to actually stop in. Like, there's a lot of steps along the media journey where people fall off. And it was actually, we developed a chat bot for them, more of the conversational commerce to start to answer some of those questions, but the opportunity was uncovered in looking where there were some really terrible media efficiencies in their funnel for the kind of questions people had. The pure communication, push communication, wasn't doing enough to actually get them over the hump. It was when they came to the website, you see they were spending all this time. A little prompt could do so much more, and so really infusing AI to some of those questions, or I should say some of the answers of what people needed to actually get through booking a cruise had massive effect. But it started with a very, very simple prototype. It didn't actually integrate with any back-end systems. It was purely informational, and you see how that develops and is now a much more integrated part of everything that they do.
I think you have a really good point about a lot of the times that the things that we see is in order to improve your customer experience, you actually have to change your business processes and start to look at, like, what are the business problems or the things that need to change in order to improve our customer experience. And it almost always is a business process thing that we start with that then changes the customer experience.
Just to chime in, so I've found it's helpful to ask a couple of questions. Like, are you looking to get really good answers and you don't care how you get the answers? Or are you looking to find out what's working, and do you really want to know what tweaks you're making and how that's affecting the outcome metric that you're looking at? And that answer will guide you down an entirely different path of, like, what algorithms, what math to use, and that's been really helpful for us.
So when I think about what I'm hearing, one of the things I always think about is what I encounter when I'm dealing with a client. And this doesn't matter if they're a small client and they're trying to emerge in a market, or they're a large client and they're trying to maintain market share. Regardless, they've got some processes in place, right? And processes are the antithesis of experimentation and innovation in some ways, which is not to say one's right or wrong, but how are you dealing with how what you're proposing is potentially altering or affecting existing processes within your clients' day-to-day work? Are you guys encountering any of that? Are you having to address that?
Always. When it comes to content in particular is where it impacts a lot of things, because a lot of our clients are not ready to produce the scale that AI or machine learning needs from a content standpoint. So it's about us working with our main stakeholders to find kind of a core team that's willing and able, excited to be a little bit messy in their process, change their process, and then, as everyone's been saying, pilot a program, take the learnings, and then start to scale up from there.
I would say as an agency, we're really not set up for that kind of scale either, right? Like the increase in the amount of content you have to create, I think it's hard for everyone. So I wouldn't say it's just client side that is struggling to reorganize around how that happens. How do we make content that is faster, cheaper? Like, that's always the question, and that's hard, especially when you're looking at something that could ultimately become 10,000 different versions of a banner ad.
So do you think that that's a really interesting point? It feels like it's starting to eclipse maybe the human side of the business a little bit? I mean, if you think about what we do, the first day, I don't know if everybody was here, but the PopShip CMO spent a good 30 minutes talking about how sometimes we forget the emotional aspect of connecting with our customers. Do you all feel that there's any risk of, in this rush to apply more intelligent systems, we're kind of leaving the connection with the customer behind, or is that
Yes.
Is that a fallacy?
Yes, 100%. It's the constant battle, and even internally, we have to have honest conversations around how you keep your brand soul. As a brand strategist, we spend so much time waxing poetic about our purpose and our mission and how to make sure every brand action really embodies that. And then, you put it into the machine and it comes out the other end potentially feeling a little soulless, or like it could have come from any brand. So when it comes to optimizing, we're always looking at how you keep that ethos, how when you are doing something like DCO or programmatic, it's showing up in the messages in the right places. It's creative that has been optimized to come together in the right ways, and that it still feels true to what a brand's mission is. An example here is Crocs is a client of ours, and they have a great brand purpose. The campaign is Come As You Are. It's about everyone comfortable in their own shoes, and you can see how when you are using some sort of programmatic or DCO creative, it might show up on Breitbart, for example, which has happened, and it's because everybody wears Crocs. Everyone, it's mom, it's a hunter in the middle of America, it is a fashionista in New York, and so that means that the message ends up in lots of different places, and you see how that very quickly can become a little weird, tricky, or uncomfortable.
I think that's a major point, right? Like, this isn't about set it and forget it or sort of offloading a lot of your duties onto it. So at Wavemaker, we always tie everything we do to the purchase journey. So there's always something going on, and if something's going to enable faster, better, more customized messages, cost savings, whatever it is that you're looking to do, you can't just kind of say, like, great, I'm going to farm that out to the machine, right? You need to sort of figure out, what can the machine do faster than my team can do, and get back something that can be reapplied for the consumer. We are working on behalf of the consumer. We work on behalf of the clients that pay us, but ultimately we are one team, one dream working towards the consumer. No matter where they are in that purchase journey, what are you delivering that's providing utility, experience, that emotional connection? So I think it's less relying on looking at this technology of how can you save me time and money. It's how are you saving me hassle on the back end to let me focus on that consumer. Let me apply better, more creative data, more, a better, bigger picture to really think and sort of have my head clear to think and get more creative about driving that emotional connection through content, through experience, through delivery, right time, right place. And there's always going to be the Breitbarts and all that fun stuff that comes with trial and error. But you can't look at this tech as the solve for, like, cool, I'm out of here early today, right? It's how are you saving time, cranking on the back end so that you can focus on the consumer first. And it's really critical we don't let go of that.
So as the maker of the machine, I've gotten in trouble so many times on this sort of topic, sort of creating lists or identifying populations that are really ideal for maybe a cross-sell or something like that, some sort of message, and then someone looks at the list, they're like, why is that person there? Well, I don't know, but let's go explore it. So I think it's sort of on my team to make sure we have outreach to the creative teams, to the planning teams, and we do that now, and it's helped us uncover a lot of interesting nuggets, because one of the great things about ML or AI, if you're going to make me say it, is I
made you say it. You had to say it.
Is that you uncover things that are totally non-intuitive about customer behavior or things like that, and you can explore that insight with the planning team, with the strategy team, and really get on insight.
That's a huge opportunity that I see. I think not enough agencies have their data scientists or analyst team and their planners and their creatives learning from what we know from clients' data in the early upfront creative planning process, and basically reusing our information, learning from what we have seen customers interact with a retargeting banner or something like that. It's almost like, what I like to think about it is a living persona. Once you've made your personas originally, they're always evolving. Every time we serve an ad, we learn something new about them.
So this actually brings up a really good point, which is competencies, right? And I think about what we saw with Marc's presentation. 4 or 5 years ago, competency in selecting a marketing cloud provider wasn't front and center for a lot of marketing managers, right? That was something that was off in the future. Now we see it as sort of central to your job. And we think about the competencies that are emerging due to this field. What competencies do you think marketing organizations need to be putting in place to be efficient and effective at this in the next couple of years?
I think that, and I'm biased, but it's the analytics talent that there's so much competition for right now, and frankly, we're not going to win every time against 9 times out of 10. We're not going to win against Google recruiters or something like that. And so it's finding people who are interested in this space and nurturing them and teaching them the talent they need. Because the wonderful thing about, and I should, as an aside, we have an analytics stack that's very nimble, very cheap, and we're just good at coding, and we can get so much out of that. And if you find the people that are sort of able to do that and dock with other systems in the tech stack and do their own explorations, what you have is a team that can really answer almost any question that comes your way. And that becomes a really valuable tool when you have clients asking every question.
I agree. It's critical. I think people forget with machine learning, the learning is in there for a reason, right? This isn't a black box that you hit the on switch and it sucks up your data and spits out all the answers to all of the world's problems. It gets smarter, but you need to be the one who's putting the information in there, putting the data in there, getting that data back, putting more data in there, and sort of, trial, erroring, and learning alongside that machine, which is why, to your point, data analytics, data scientists, whatever you want to call your team, it's so critical to have competent people who understand what they're looking at and what's missing or what they can poke for. But I think it's a huge miss if we just go to this data crunch number situation. You're missing the creativity, you're missing the strategic components. And what's really nice about machine learning, deep learning, AI, all of the bingo buzzwords we've been talking about, it sounds like you guys have been talking about the past day or so. We could talk forever about what the pros and cons are, about what systems and how you can apply them. But if you don't have someone who takes a step back and says, here's, they're crunching data, they're connecting disparate dots of data that we never even thought mattered or could unveil an insight. If you don't take time to have the people in place that are the people who think creatively, think strategically, can think big picture, we're all just a bunch of machines too. So it's really, really important to keep those people on your teams that are strategic thinkers, bigger picture, can tie back to that human connectivity, understand who a consumer is, where they are in that purchase journey, and how to best build that emotional connection, leveraging all of the strong findings and opportunities that machine learning can bring you.
I think from my perspective, one of the biggest fallacies in agency world is that not enough people understand business cases, because at the end of the day, our clients are making technology investments and they need to sell it into their internal teams time and time again, as Marc said, however long his process was. And we're helping our clients prep themselves for this internal sell-in process. And the best way we can do that is building a business case around, this is the customer experience, this is what you should start to see an ROI, or what you might be able to learn from it, and so on. And then the other kind of thing, I think, is that I was a professor for a long bit of time in Boston, and I was teaching marketing students, and marketing students have no idea what the job possibilities are. And so one of the things that we can do as professors, or professionals, sorry, is teach them the world of AI and machine learning. The kids at MIT and Harvard and things like that are well aware, but the marketing students that are out there have no clue. They would say, I just want a job in marketing. No idea what their prospects are.
So when you're talking to these great minds of tomorrow, how do you describe the future? Do you talk about marketing in general, or talk about business and AI?
They don't know what AI is or machine learning.
So how do you discuss that with them? How do you describe the future of how things are going to be?
Yeah, so you break it down into just like what we would for clients, and what Kate has done is you provide case studies of, that thing, that Uber that you use all the time, this is what powers it, and this is kind of how it works. And there's people that think about this and that, and it's us in this room and those of you on the live stream that are going to help the talent of tomorrow learn about the possibilities. So if we want them as our colleagues, if we want them on our team, it's our responsibility to make university partnerships as our companies and go into those schools and teach them, train them early so that we have the talent when we're hiring people.
Yeah, to build on that, one of the disciplines that we see the most demand for internally for us is, it's a spin on copywriting, right? Very traditional advertising discipline, and we're actually trying to teach students now when we go out to classes about verbal design. If you're thinking about conversational commerce and how you design that conversation so it actually doesn't feel like it comes from a robot, it means you're thinking about not just communications, but how people talk to each other, how they build relationships, what a real connection looks like, so that you're designing a conversation that feels really true and not necessarily like it's coming from something that's soulless.
Yeah, I'll speak for the data science side a little bit. When we're recruiting, really, we've had a lot of success with people that get exposure to some of the advanced algorithms, and also how it relates to real life. So a really good example of that would be policy or economics. So we focus in on those areas, particularly in master's students. And in Pittsburgh, we're very lucky. We have a nice university system to draw from. But we've been able to find get a good hit rate for those kinds of students. Yeah.
So you touched upon fallacies earlier, which I think is like possibly the most important part of the discussion. You talked a little bit earlier about how could you describe it in 2 lines, because most of the time we're feeling around in the dark trying to explain this to laymen, or possibly even stumbling the fact that maybe we don't know as much as we think we do sometimes. And so when we think about that, I always appreciate learning from people who've been in the field. What are some of the fallacies that y'all are seeing and some of the flags that you have where you're like, whoa, I got to call that out? That's something we need to resolve right now, because if this is in the conversation, it means it's not as serious or maybe not as educated as we think it is. Do y'all see that? Do y'all see the bump into like the landmines and stuff where you're like, we have to kind of right set this conversation?
I think it's the set it and forget it. Like, that is the biggest fallacy that I think we're a little more in tune with, but clients are like, okay, great, I'm going to implement this robot and it's going to go forth. And in fact, the human element is so important, but the most common thing is that you set it and forget it.
Over-promising. So we all think that AI and machine learning, especially chatbots, can solve everything and that they will understand us. I think you had said it earlier, but there are limitations to the technology, and the panel, or the keynote earlier mentioned this, that we have to understand the limitations as much as the possibilities of the technology at the early onset. Be realistic about the roadmap of your vendors and so on.
Yeah, I mean, when we are talking to vendors, we'll probe a lot on the kinds of algorithms they're using, and we've found a lot of them are rushing things to market, rushing solutions to market, and they're using very simplistic, very easy to do, probably missing out on a lot of opportunity without going back and doing the R&D and the development a little bit better.
On over-promising, an interesting sort of case study is working with a large resort, and we built a bot that would help you on premise and on property to wayfind around, to get reservations, to book shows and things along those lines. And in part of building it, we wanted to go out and interview servers at the restaurant, the bartender, the concierge, everybody. And at first the client didn't understand, like, no, we have all this information about every restaurant. You'll put that into the bot and it'll go forth. And you realize that the intrinsic knowledge, the insider tips and things like that, there's an education hump in terms of what AI can do when there's not more to it.
You know what's fascinating about that? There's actually a really great book by a guy named George Zakadarkis that's called In Our Own Image, and it actually covers that in depth, like the anthropological roots of human-machine interaction. And I would encourage anybody to get that if you're interested in that field, because it's a really important point.
Yeah, I think that makes the point that too often we make the mistake of technology before humanity. You know, we are creating human experiences. We are connecting with humans. Everyone in this room is a consumer, but I'm going to guess you're 99.9% human, right? Maybe not in the office, but here we are.
Turing test we can apply.
Yeah, we could talk about that later. But, you know, there is this thing, it's humanity first, and you can't just rely on the data and the machine. It's the things that sit between those dots of data that's so critical. But you sort of said, what are the road bumps? The big road bump I think we didn't get a chance to address on this panel is partners. How do you pick partners? You know, not everybody does everything in-house, nor should you be a jack of all trades. But when it comes to the right partners, I think it's really making sure that you get involved. And it's not about what's cheapest, who's promising to be fastest. I'm sure you could attest to this. I've seen so many partners that promise the world, and a very cursory kick under the hood. It's not machine learning. It's not AI. They're hiding behind buzzwords and cheap and pretty images and a beautiful logo, and it's a hot mess. So it's really doing your due diligence to find the right partner. It's not about looking at who's cheapest, who's fastest, who's got the right case studies, who says the right things to your client. It's getting in the weeds, learning alongside them, you know, getting a little messy, admitting that you are not a professional at this and you are a student alongside everybody else, and looking at those partners and really vetting them properly. Because if you start with a really crappy product from the get-go and partner, it's only going to get worse from there.
And I would think being able to have the hard conversations, right, which in the more mature parts of business, it's easier to gloss over because there's generally shared knowledge, right? Like, well, we've all done this before, but in more emerging fields, there's not so much shared knowledge. So if you can't have honest communications, oftentimes you'll find yourself a few steps back down the road, and that's very painful.
We've seen clients that have signed contracts but without talking to us because an AI company came in and wowed them and their demo, and it's going to be like 14 cents and in 15 minutes, and you just have to be the one to sit there and be like, you got had. But we can fix this, right? And it's a learning lesson.
Is there a 90-day out on that contract?
Yeah, exactly. But it's less about you messed up and more, here's where there's opportunities with that partner, and here's where you're going to fall short. Because it's not a black and white situation. Some companies do one thing great and other things horrendously. But it's about figuring out what do you actually want to do and solve for, which goes back to the original question of, how do you apply this and how do you create a strategy and do you need to create a strategy? The answer is yes, but you need to figure out what do you want to do, and from there you figure out the humanity first component, who the right partners could be, have that learning, have that conversation, and then you can start your testing.
That's great. So Stephen, I know we were going to spend some time with some questions from the audience.
Some questions.
Hi, Megan, VSA Partners. Knowing that AI and ML dictate media placement and also like creative development, how do you balance kind of the creative inspiration from that team, kind of you dictating to them what they should develop, and how do you balance kind of that relationship?
I'll take a stab at that. So actually, for one of my clients, we've been changing the creative brief, and we've been helping the creative understand the implications at the end of the creative process early upfront, so that we can start to get their brains inspired by where the end result might end up being. But also, when you take into account when you're mixing creative and mixing messages, different targeting for different people, they need to understand all of those different people and the different iterations and kind of the process that their creative will go through on the way to get to the customer. And all of that is actually just changing the creative brief. We've found that it's just not insightful enough for them to understand the process of how they need to get to the end creative for everyone on the end to be happy.
Yeah, we definitely push our clients to change the briefing process for flexibility, but on our side, we bring everybody in earlier. I think you tend to have this process of person A gets the brief, they kick it to B, they kick it to C, and you sort of go through that loop. Somewhere there's a breakdown and you fix it. We get everybody, whether it's the content people, the people who are going to be doing the buying, whoever's going to be touching this experience, everybody's there up front, right? It level sets, it gets everybody on the same page, and it brings that humanity into the process. But also, to your point, any issues, any table stakes, any things you need to know, any data points, any past learnings from the last time you went through this, all of it's out there for the first 5 minutes of the conversation, and you can move forward from there as a unified team and not just sort of a cog in a process and not knowing what's going on and working in a silo.
I just add to that, we actually have a formal system to address exactly what you described. And basically, machine learning, AI, whatever you want to call it, exploits what it knows or what the history has been, but it doesn't explore beyond that. It's constrained to the data it has. And so we actually have a policy with some clients now where we have a fairly, I would say, sophisticated sort of media evaluation engine that gives these insights. But we say, put 80% of your budget toward these insights, modify however you want, but we're going to set aside 20% for exploration. New vendors, do creative ideas, things like that. And so we call it the exploit-explore process. And it's worked really nicely in some cases.
I think I'm going to steal that. That one's actually really good.
Copyrighted.
I'll just tweak it.
I think the other thing is you can't send the creative team off to write or to come up with a campaign, a big campaign idea, without thinking about where the message will live. Like that's where we find a lot of that tension. Is it's like first let's land the big idea, and then once we have it, you realize it doesn't actually make sense for DCO or the placements or the kind of problems we want to solve from a lower funnel media messaging standpoint. So we always try to I'd rather wait a week to brief and have all the information than reverse engineer, because that's painful for everyone every time.
Well, I think we're about out of time. Do we have any other questions? Well, I wanted to say I was really honored to be on the stage with you guys. This is a great group, and I do encourage anybody, if you do have any follow-up questions, or take advantage, because you're not going to get this many smart people in a small space on this topic again. So anyhow, thank you all very much for your time, and thank you all for letting us speak with you today.
Thanks very much, guys. Thanks, Jason.